As part of Booktubeathon 2018, one of the challenges was to read a book and watch the movie adaptation. The book I chose for that challenge was Chocolat. I had seen the movie years ago and remembered loving it. Don't remember much of the details, but I had been wanting to read the book for a while, so I thought this was the perfect opportunity. So I read Chocolat and I loved the book, and I immediately watched the movie again, and even though I liked it years ago, in comparison to the book, it just wasn't as good. So today I'm going to talk about the details of the book and the movie, the differences, my thoughts and opinions, and this might be a little rambly, but we will get through it. This discussion will include spoilers. This is not spoiler free. I will be spoiling both the book and the movie. If you have not watched or read the book, I recommend you do that before watching this video. I thought that the themes in the movie were really watered down compared to the book, or not present at all. And I'll go into detail about what I mean about that for specific issues. I was okay with them in the movie changing the magic element and Vianne's backstory and removing that small magic element that was present throughout the book, like having her figure out everyone's favorite chocolate based on the spinning platter instead of just her intuition. I can see how that would be difficult to translate into a movie, and for me, the real magic of the story was in the change that happened in the town and the people that lived in it, so I was okay with that. Let's talk about Judi Dench as Armande. She was perfect. I loved her casting. I loved her performance. It was on point for that character. I was okay with them changing Luke's gift to her from the red underwear to the portrait. I liked what they did with that evolution from him coming in and being hired by Vianne to sketch a portrait, and it happens to be his grandmother, to giving it to her on her birthday. I thought that was really nicely done and poignant, and it still stayed within the theme of grandson and grandmother reconnecting. And they read poetry together in the chocolate shop, and even though that was much more fleshed out in the book, I thought they got the heart of that through the movie. The only thing I didn't really care for or had some trouble with Armande's character was her death. In the movie, it just seems like she dies of old age after a party, and even though we know that she had a great time and that was the best time for her to have died, I guess, if that doesn't sound too heartless, in the book, there was this massive theme on her choice in that, her autonomy, even if her friends and her family weren't happy about it and they would miss her, and choosing to live her life the way she wants to in the end. That was a really important theme for me in the book, and while I can kind of understand them not being able to translate that fully into the movie, I thought that was important enough that the movie not going into that depth detracts from that theme. I thought that dynamic was really important. And as with much of the themes in the movie, it was just watered down, thin versions that the book really tackled and that were really important for them to tackle. And the most important theme that I think the movie did a real disservice on was Serge, or Paul in the book, Josephine's husband. In the book, it is a major issue that he is a domestic abuser, and in the movie, they really trivialize it to the point where they have the mayor, who in the movie is the primary antagonist. He takes it upon himself to reform Josephine's husband, to reform Serge. And they do it in this campy, montagey way where they have the compilation scenes of him sitting at the table learning how to eat properly, learning how to dress in a suit, in Sunday school, sitting in a little mini desk with all the kids and him getting all the answers wrong from the Bible. It just made a joke of domestic abuse. For me, that is the worst thing the movie did. It took away that dynamic, that issue of Paul being driven out of town after the incident in the cafe where he's terrorizing Josephine. They didn't do any of that. They did have a scene where he came to the chocolate shop and drunkenly broke in and started attacking Josephine and Vianne, and then Josephine does have to knock him out with a pan. But they immediately start laughing after it. And and there's no consequences other than him being dumped out onto the curb, passed out. And again, it trivialized it. It didn't get to the heart of that. I really wish they had tackled that issue of domestic abuse without making it a joke. And it also took away the whole issue of the townspeople basically being horrible and knowing that Paul beats Josephine, but because they don't see it or because it's not in the forefront, they ignore it, and then they're standing outside of that cafe while the yelling is going on inside when Paul is terrorizing Josephine and not doing anything. That's an important theme that Joanne Harris in the book really tackled and pointed out and criticized, and they did nothing like that in the movie. Paul is driven out because the mayor tells him no one can ever find out he actually burned the boat, whereas he's driven out by shame in the book. And it's all this very subtle town shaming, and that dynamic was totally missing, and it really didn't work for me in the movie. One aspect about the movie and the book that I like both versions of them is that in the book, Vianne is so confident and so sure of herself. She knows who she is, she knows what the other people are, and she doesn't care what they think, and she sticks to that, and she knows how to handle people for the most part. And I really like that confidence and that self-assuredness. In the movie, she's more human. She gets confused, she gets angry, she gets discouraged. Not that she wasn't human in the book, but she's a little bit more dimensional. She has to work through more issues herself. And I did like that dynamic at the end when she gets really discouraged by the town and she doesn't feel like she fits in and she almost leaves. She's packing up her stuff. She's packing up Anouk's stuff, and then her mother's ashes fall out. You can really see the struggle in her character and in what moving means to her and how she wants to fit in the movie. But then my favorite part of that whole scene, and possibly the entire movie, as she's packing up, Josephine is trying to get her to stay there, and Vianne says, no, nothing has changed here. And then Josephine looks at her, and you know Josephine's moved in, she's away from her husband, she's a completely different person than she was from that shaky thief in the beginning. And she looks at Vianne and she says, it has for me, and she leaves. And that's so powerful. And then as Vianne is leaving and they're going down the stairs and her mother's ashes have fallen out, she doesn't know what to do. She hears people downstairs and she sees Josephine has taken the townspeople that Vianne has most changed, and they're all making chocolate together, and it is just the best scene in the movie. Oh, I love Josephine. I love her and Vianne's relationship. I love what they do for each other, both in the book and the movie. And having that scene in the movie was just the best thing they could have done. How she has had an effect on them. And that theme really stood out in the movie for me. Going back to another time in the beginning when Vianne is discouraged, Vianne goes to the mayor and she's really discouraged, and she asks him, why are you discouraging people from coming to my shop? Have I done anything to you? Have I broken any laws? So I definitely like that more human aspect, but I also liked her unflappable confidence and power in the book. Going back to talking about the mayor, I hated that they changed the antagonist to the mayor in the movie as opposed to the church and the pastor in the book. I loved in the book that it was an unforgiving criticism of the church and the misinterpretations or interpretations, however you want to take it, of church doctrine and what it does to the town. It was refreshing. I preferred seeing that. I understand why they changed it, because if they had kept it that way, they likely would have alienated Christian audiences, and having the moral of the story in the movie be presented by the church boy, and at the end when he's spouting the moral, he's spouting about tolerance instead, would be more welcomed and probably more palatable, and more audiences would take away from that instead if the movie had put the church as the antagonist. But for me, I really like seeing the church and organized religion called out for the horrors and the intolerance and the hate and the passivity that it often encourages. So again, I understand, but I think it was a mischoice to pretend that intolerance isn't misinterpreted in one man separate from the church, as if the church was not a part of that equation, and when really it is. And continuing with that, the movie makers really shied away from making the mayor seem like a bad person. they had Caro. In the book, her husband was alive and he was terrible, but in the movie, she was a widow, and they had this little romance aspect implied between her and the mayor and just trying to redeem the hell out of every character. It seemed like an appeasement to me rather than the theme of the book in really trying to criticize and call out and not put actions and viewpoints under wraps, and I really preferred that in the book. Continuing with more romance. There was definitely much more romance in the movie between Roux and Vianne, and I actually did not like the romance aspects in the book or the movie. First of all, in the book, it came out of left field in the last 2 seconds of the book when Vianne at least thought Roux was already in a relationship with Josephine. Why would he want to sleep with Vianne at that point? It seemed like Joanne Harris just threw that aspect in so that Vianne could get a kid from him for some reason, and that was it. And I just thought it was completely unnecessary. It didn't add anything to the plot, and because they added more to it in the movie and because audiences love romance, I understood it and I thought it was done fairly well, especially with her trying to figure out his favorite chocolate throughout. I thought that was done well, but I didn't think the romance itself was necessary. I liked them as friends, especially since in the book their friendship was really well established and described. Frankly, I thought in the book Roux and Armande had more chemistry than Roux and Vianne. I loved Roux and Armande's relationship with each other and didn't think that going into actual romance was necessary. And I will never forgive the marketers for the movie for making Johnny Depp the big deal of the movie, when in both book and movie it is entirely about women and the themes between each other and intolerance and women helping each other out of difficult situations or working through situations with each other. Roux's character was so much more important in the book. He and his entourage were there to show the intolerance of the town, but it wasn't nearly as prominent a theme in the movie. And to put his face on the cover art for the movie with Vianne feeding him a little piece of chocolate made it seem like much more of a romance when the themes that it actually tackles are so much more important than that. And actually, there's a scene in the book where Vianne does feed someone a little piece of chocolate, but it's not Roux, it's Josephine. And to replace Josephine with Roux in that just does my feminist heart a lot of pain. And lastly, I do want to talk about Caro. In the book, like I said, I was really set on the book's unforgiving criticism of the town and characters like Caro who are really intolerant and unredeemable, but I do like that in the movie she had a redemption arc. They didn't really explain why she had a redemption arc. It was very surface level, but I like seeing her connect with her son. I liked seeing her take that bike out and start to trust him and take the training wheels off of her own parenting, especially because it means good things for Luke. So I did like seeing that, even though in the book I liked the point that Joanne Harris made about sheep following the doctrine of whoever is leading them at that time without any thought and without anything between their ears. Overall, I loved the book. I loved the themes that it tackled. I loved that it wasn't just romance or frankly any romance other than those 2 seconds at the end. I love the relationship between the women. I love that they tackled autonomy between Josephine and getting hold of her own life and separating and getting her out of that horrible situation with her husband. I liked them tackling the theme with Armande and her choosing to live the end of her life the way she wants and what makes her happy, and choosing even to end that life when she wants to, even though her family and her friends don't want to for various reasons. I liked the theme of intolerance and just the blatant aspects of how wrong it is in so many ways. And I think in the movie, other than the dynamic between Vianne and Josephine, which I think was the strongest in how Vianne came in and encouraged change for the better, especially in Josephine and the people who were downstairs making chocolate together, I think that shined brightest. I think that is the focal point of the entire movie, the best part by far. Other than that, the themes were really watered down, just surface touched. And I understand why. Again, it's a movie. It's catering to wide swaths of audiences, and they only have a certain amount of time to get themes in. But, make a TV series so you can flesh things out. If Peter Jackson can take little book The Hobbit and turn it into 3 gigantic movies, then you can do justice to the themes in a book like this. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Chocolat, both book and movie. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts on the book or the movie are, and I will see you next time. Thank you for joining me.